Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas, and I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about how smarter prototyping builds better games. Indie developers often feel stuck between moving quickly and building something worth committing to. Move too slow and momentum fades, but if we move too fast, then you risk committing to ideas before they've been properly tested. So today, we're going to dive into how smarter prototyping helps teams validate ideas earlier, learn faster, and make stronger development decisions. And we'll also look at how the right tools can support faster iteration without becoming a distraction. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back, and today with us I have Josh Hirshfield. Josh, how's it going, man? And thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, it's going well. Glad to be here. Excited to talk.
Oh yeah, definitely, because, well, we'll get into it. There's lots to talk about. But first, folks, for those of you who aren't familiar with Josh, he is the CEO and founder at Pyrebug Studios. And yeah, please tell us a little bit more about your studio, what you do, and I don't know, other things that you want to share with us. I know we got a lot.
Yeah, sure. So I guess because we have a lot, I'll just kind of keep it pretty apt. But Pyrebug sort of represents my own work as a developer and the collaborations that I've done with lots of different people. I started it in undergrad just before the pandemic, about a year before, and made like small indie games, worked with people and collaborated. And then we worked on making educational games as a team for the University of Connecticut, which is also my alma mater.
Okay,
and
cool.
that was pretty great. And then since then, Pyrebug has just become sort of my own personal sort of like, not necessarily brand, but business that allows me to do stuff with games and work with others. And most of that is NDA right now, so I can't talk about it. But that's kind of what we do. I kind of work with people and collaborate with them, and Pyrebug sort of represents me.
Awesome. I love that too. Like, I mean, if you think about it too, a lot of the work we're doing, especially in our own studios and stuff, even in our own projects, right? They're very representative of us as who we are as people and stuff, right? So I like that you phrase it that way, because sometimes I think we look at things differently, where we're just like, oh, we're just slapping a brand on this, but it's more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always funny because when I entered graduate school, we had just released an educational game. It's all about learning and problem solving and verbal, like problem solving specifically through like arguments and discussion and learning about how people think, basically. And immediately upon entering grad school, sort of everybody was sort of like, oh, cool, so you're like an education games person. And my immediate response was just, no, actually, I think I want to make the most video game that has ever video gamed, and and so I kind of went in a completely different direction than what I had previously done. And I think educational games are incredibly important. And after graduating, I also worked as the game development director for about a year at a completely different educational games company too. So I think they hold a special place in my heart, and they allow for students to experience the process of learning under the guise and guidance and context of a game, right? Something that you can engage with, something that you can experience. And one of the things that I think we prided ourselves on was the ability to make something that felt engaging and interesting, that really did have you coming away from it with a new form of applicable knowledge that changed your view on the world. And I think ultimately that's one of the things that makes games so amazing.
Oh, absolutely. And I got to say, I mean, that type of foundation too is, I think, key, because even when I share the term like educational games or something similar to like my son, he's like, ugh. But I mean, what you just said at the end there is perfect, because that foundation, I mean, that's effectively what we're doing as like storytellers, creators, and everything else when it comes to games, is we're trying to teach you something, even in just simple game design. That's the process. We're teaching you to progress and everything else. And in a way, it's just formatted a little bit differently. That's all. So I'm sure that probably, as it sounds like, gave you a really good foundation to apply that, make the video games of all video games however we put the term together, it's effective. In addition to that stuff, though, I mean, which is all really cool and exciting, I mean, you're involved with a lot of other types of things too. I know, I think one thing is you have some organizations that you're part of, like IGDA, but also quick shout out to Gumbo too, because we've had
more than quick shout out to Gumbo.
Okay,
big shout out to Gumbo.
You know what I gotta say about Gumbo? Any folks past episodes, Zhang, I believe, and then Hamna, I can't remember her last name, but they're from Gumbo. But anytime we have someone from Gumbo, and then I will give you the floor again, they are always out of all the groups and people that of things that people represent here, like Gumbo is like the one that will shout from the rooftops every time, and I love seeing that about them. I really do. It's like that energy that you guys all have there is amazing. So please, let's hear more of it real quick.
Yeah, Gumbo is a nonprofit organization. I've been part of Gumbo since 2023, and I think that what drew me to that community is really what you've identified, that specific feeling that it's not something that I've necessarily felt in every other space, but there definitely is this ultimate competitive nature in so much of creative media that is just so pervasive in all of these different representations of it, right? Like in if you watch a movie about the films industry, nobody is like sitting there saying, "Oh wow, you want to make your movie? Let's make your movie together. Let's do it." Like, no, every single and that's how it is, right? It's get in line, wait your turn, use your connections, spend all your social credit, and maybe you'll get to make your movie. But I think that and there's so many different parts of the games industry that are like that too, or it was much more pervasive in the late 90s and 2000s, right? Where that disgusting culture of like, do whatever you need to do to make your game was the only way to make a video game, and then you were still treated badly. But I think that what Gumbo represents to me is this much stronger subculture that has emerged out of New York specifically, right? Gumbo as a culture is, join us and we all want to give you a hand, right? We all want to assist you and we want to see you succeed. And every time a game comes out at Gumbo, we have a launch party, right? And everyone at Gumbo buys the game and tells all their friends to buy the game. And then we all play it. And throughout the process of making it, we'll do playtests together, feedback sessions. If I have a question, I can just walk over to someone and just, "Hey, actually, I'm having a little bit of a problem. Do you think you could help me solve this problem?" And almost every single time, no, not even almost, every single time I've done that, without any expectation of anything in return, the person whom I've asked has just stood up and walked over to a whiteboard with me and fixed something. And I think that you see this a lot in Gumbo, but you also see it with Boshi's Place, which is also a wonderful community, and I love all those guys. And you see it, with just the New York creative scene in general. And I think that's, to me at least, that's what makes Gumbo so great, is it represents part of that in my life for me. And also shout out to the IGDA as well. I think that they're really cool and they're doing a lot of great work, and their monthly talks are fantastic. I've been to almost every single one of them that I've known about, I believe. So like maybe 6 or 7, I'm trying to remember. And I gave one a couple months ago as well about this very topic of tool development and prototyping, which I hope that that wasn't a spoiler, actually, because
it's all good. They know from the intro, so
yeah. I was thinking about like maybe the title of the episode is already there.
Yeah, you're cleared, but yeah. No, I mean, folks, I didn't mind to digress for a moment there, though, because, like, in all seriousness, like, one, these communities are helpful, and I know for some of you, you don't necessarily have that, and actually there's some previous episodes, I can't recall off the top of my head, that we talk about those types of things and what you can get for access, but even in those communities and stuff, I mean, it's just as a whole in general, like, these places are so great, but, man, like I said before, Gumbo really stands out, because it's just anytime that I've talked to a member from that community, it's amazing how much energy. Not to downplay anybody else's organization or anything, they're all great out there doing awesome things, but it's just, I noticed this pattern. I can say that now because now I think it's at least 3 people, if not more, that anytime Gumbo comes up, it's like, bam, like, it's there. So love it.
I owe a great deal of my career to Gumbo.
And that's
for
what
sure.
like everybody says when they like talk about it. It's great. All right. We got to get back on track, but
Sure.
it definitely was warranted. Also, I'm going to skip through this part real quick, but Josh mentioned too, he has done a talk, but he has actually done quite a bit talks, and he has a whole link of them. We're not going to go into what they've done, what he's talked about, and what those topics are, but one of them we're definitely covering in a lot of detail today in a moment, but we will put that in the show note links because I'm telling you, you want to check these things out. All right. So moving right along, Josh, thank you for allowing us to get to know you, but we want to dig in a little bit more and get to know you a little bit more as well. So we're going to do that with the Q box round. Just a few random questions I prepared here today. So the question is now, are you ready?
I hope so.
All right, let's do it. Okay. First question is, what was your childhood favorite game?
Okay, so I think the first thing that anyone asks me ever when I say I work in the games industry is, oh my gosh, what's your favorite video game? And I feel like I've thought about what it means for what favorite means a lot. I feel like it's not as obvious as people think. Your favorite color is just the one I feel like you like the most, right? The one that you look at and you're like, oh yeah, I like the color blue. The color blue makes me feel relaxed. It makes me feel comfortable.
Yep.
It's not too abrasive, but maybe you like the color red because it's exciting. So I've thought about favorite, and so I'm going to answer this in a few different ways. I think favorite childhood game that got me into playing video games and inspired me and showed me really what games can do was Spore, which, for those of you who may not know, was a game released in the mid-2000s by Maxis right after they were purchased by Electronic Arts. And the game sort of features you starting out as a single-celled organism, and you evolve into a creature, like a land walking creature. You come out of the ocean, you become this bipedal or quadrupedal thing on land, and then you grow even more and you enter sort of this tribal stage, and you're learning about tools and community and management and exploring the world. And then you become a single city. You become sort of a city state in which you are sort of beginning your journey into a broader civilization. And then you get a spaceship, and the spaceship lets you fly around the galaxy and meet actually hundreds of other civilizations who each have their own ideologies and principles and ideas, and you work with them to build a network of your own civilization across the galaxy. And each of these phases is just as in-depth and interesting as the last. And that kind of blew my mind as a kid, because I would spend hundreds and hundreds of hours in that, but also every other person who owned this game also had that experience, and that stuck with me. That really stuck with me. And so I played a lot of similar games to that. I played SimCity. I played specifically SimCity 4 from 2004, and I remember thinking about how in-depth that game truly was, how much is actually happening. And I also played the original Sims, which all three of those games, all of which actually are, now that I think about it, very Will Wright, very Maxis, very EA, truly influenced quite a bit of how I think about games. And then, of course, growing up, I got into Skyrim quite a bit and played that a lot. And that was just cool to see, just a huge world filled with stuff. I think that was the first game that was like, oh, I can just walk into this place and there's a bunch of people to talk to, and that inspired me to play Fallout, and like specifically Fallout 3, and then some New Vegas, and then Fallout 4 later, and all that, and got me into RPGs. But the one that has stuck with me the most throughout my life is D&D. I think in every single part of my life, starting from about age 14, I've probably been playing D&D in some capacity. And ironically, I feel like when I play D&D, I try to be other people as much as possible and try to be a different kind of person, which has given me a window into what it's like to experience the world as somebody else. And I know that's like what everybody says, but I truly thought that it was just really influential in how I viewed games and how you can experience them.
Well, I want to say quickly, I think that's a really cool response because, well, one, how you were really thinking about favorites and what it means, but also like that whole transition, right? We don't ever like reflect that much in terms of the games and how in certain way, I wouldn't say define us, but like make up a part of who we are and how that part of us can shift in time and everything else. Like It's really interesting to kind of see that progression, and what you just shared there is, I think we don't ever really look at it that way. I think in general, I'm sure some of us do and have, but it's not as common. So I love that you went through that detail to share that with us. All right, next is why, big one here. Why do you make games?
So I pretty firmly believe, and this is a pretty common opinion, that games primarily allow us to connect with ourselves and others in ways that we would never really be able to outside of them. And if you make a game, you can create an experience that you share with someone else. And that is unbelievably wonderful. And that can be silly or that can be serious. And I think that I make games because it is more interesting to me than anything else that I've encountered so far in the world to be able to make someone else feel something or experience something through the process of play. And more than that, you can create spaces where people interact and experience things together. And the example that I like to give is playing Monopoly with my family. And I think a lot of people have a similar experience where, you know, you sit down with your mom and your dad and your sister or your brother or whomever, and these people who are normally very, you know, very amicable, maybe you get into some normal familial disagreements, as everybody does, but you generally like each other, I hope. And you play this game, and then suddenly your dad is like, okay, pay me rent.
Yeah.
Right? Or it's your sister is like, do this deal with me, do this deal with me, do this trade with me. And you're like, what is going on? And you're sitting there and you're like, I remember I had this reaction as a kid that these people who normally only operate in good faith with me were suddenly trying to win. And we had entered into what's known as the magic circle, right? And this is a concept that is sort of like level 1 game design that I'm sure if many of your listeners probably know already. But the idea is that when you enter into playing a game, you are all sort of, you enter into the magic circle and the normal rules of life don't apply. Yeah. So you can be mean, you can be sly, you can be this sort of character of yourself, especially in Monopoly. And I think that's why I make games. I think it's just, you can just interact with yourself and others in completely new and weird ways.
I love that. And as you were saying that, I was like, you were like, I could totally see that in my past with, you know, Monopoly, and then another game that was popping up, very similar sentiment and feelings, where it was Risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man, you thought you had good friends until you played Risk.
Yeah.
No.
I think just like tacking onto that, you thought you knew someone until you knew they were good at Risk.
Yeah, you're like,
somebody who's good at Risk will just make you feel bad.
Same thing happens when you play GoldenEye and you suck at it.
Oh my God.
Not sharing from experience at all. All right.
You're not sharing from experience. Okay, sure.
All.
Yeah. Okay, at all.
At all. All right, last one, and the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
So I went to CCNY about a year and a half ago, and I gave a talk there about making portfolios and whatever, and they asked me this question as well, and I felt like some of the students were not like, they were like, oh, okay, this is neat, but I feel like they needed something to make them be like, oh, what the hell? Like, what is going on with this guy? Who is this person? And so one of the things that a lot of people get a kick out of is the fact that I have a giant like Trello board of just all of the games that I'm playing and all of the games that I've played. And yes, I have cataloged and tracked everything, and I rate them and I write descriptions and I do everything. And so
I think kind of the first guest who has something as very like deliberate and intent with this. I'm sorry. I'm listening. I'm listening.
It's okay.
I love it.
And so I just to kind of get people like sitting up and focused in their chairs, they asked me this question. I was like, okay, well, let me bring out my spreadsheet. And so I have this methodology of playing games where I used to just like play whatever, I suppose. And that was fine for a while, but I needed to be, as you said, more deliberate about it. So now I always have a puzzle game I'm playing, a long game I'm playing, a classic game and something multiplayer to play with my friends. And those categories have driven me. So at the time I showed them the spreadsheet and I just put it up on the screen and everyone was like, who is this guy? I think like one of the students was actually like, one of the students then turned around and they were like, this is an ongoing EGD joke that had been running for like maybe a year, but they say, who is this guy? It's like, oh, that's adjunct professor Joshua Max Hirshfield. They say the full title. And there was a game jam at Global Game Jam 2024. A student made an improv game where you had, one person picked a topic and then you had to act it out within a time limit. And that was sort of the idea. And one of the prompts was pretend you are adjunct professor from New York University and Pratt, Joshua Max Hirshfield. And so it's just been like this running joke. But so to answer the question, the games that I'm playing now, I just finished The Pedestrian, which is
that one looks really good.
It's a lovely, artistically driven, calm, serene puzzle game where you play as the little guy on the walk sign.
I love how you describe calm because it's like in the imagery, it totally is, but you're in an environment that like by reality standards isn't. But anyways.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. So playing that, I'm just about to start The Artisan of Glimeth, which it looks like a Myst-like that focuses on stained glass and puzzles with that. So I'm excited to try it.
I might have to get that for my wife.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm halfway through XCOM 2, and I've also been playing the original Luigi's Mansion on GameCube, and then multiplayer-wise, I've been playing. I tried Peak for the first time yesterday, and I've also been playing a lot of modded Minecraft, like a ridiculous amount of modded Minecraft.
So the TLDR of this is almost everything.
Yeah, I get I get around. If there's anything that I'm just multifaceted. All right, I suppose. I hope.
If there is a guest that I need to maybe create a reward right now on the spot, but you take it for like the most games. There's some people with a pretty extensive lineup and stuff, but this is impressive. I love it, and the energy behind it, and the intent. You get that award. Maybe sometime
episode
soon.
447.
Yeah,
you're just creating an award at episode 400.
It's the first time I'm creating an award on the show. You heard it here, folks. Like it's happening. It's I don't know what we'll come up with the name.
Just call it like. He was organized. They were organized. Award.
No. We'll figure it out. But you
Sure.
have it. You have it. Just know it's guaranteed there. Okay.
Well, all right.
I'm liking this already. And now we're getting into the actual just wait. There's more because there's a lot more. Because folks, as I led in with the intro, and then Josh here teased a little bit earlier. We're here to talk about how smarter prototyping builds better games. And let's face it, we're always looking to create better games, better experiences, and everything else around that. So on that topic, Josh, to kick things off, from your experience as both a developer and an educator, where would you say most teams start to lose either momentum or clarity? And how often does that come back to what happened during prototyping, or can we even attribute it back to prototyping?
Yeah. So I think that if you have an idea that excites you while you are prototyping, then it should drive you to build something and finish that thing. But that's not to say that like you should just feel the same level of intensity of drive to build that thing the whole time. Sometimes you do. So I definitely have. I've felt that a couple of times for games, and I really like it. But it just means that you shouldn't be sitting there doing something that you despise or feel like you don't want to or don't have any motivation for at all. And that's sort of been the main feeling, right? Like completely sitting there like, I simply don't really want to do this right now. And that's what I've identified the most. And in my experience, if you reach that point and the idea is completely blech, like it's just gray, right? I really want to do it, then you've probably made a mistake somewhere in your process. And so what's worked for myself and my students and collaborators and many people that I know is to look back at your process and think about the decisions you've made in the process of creating your game. And a lot of the time this happens initially in the first prototyping phase where you have an idea and you experiment with it and you just keep going, and eventually you do lose sight of that initial idea of what made you so just so excited about it. And if a core system is changed in a fundamental way in that process, then you'll pretty quickly realize, oh, I don't really like this. And you just kind of want to turn around and take a look and say, what decisions have I made that I like or dislike, or maybe don't really allow me to identify with the goal that I'm trying to reach. And when you talk about momentum in games, I feel like what people are usually referring to is the relationship between motivation and output, right? So there's lots of ways to make people get motivated. There's lots of ways to garner motivation. And that's typically people being paid to make a video game, right? It's usually, hello, I'll give you some money. In exchange for this money, I would like you to program for 8 hours a day. That's kind of the idea. But most of the time, that's not really the case. When people are making games and looking for motivation, that's not really when this question gets asked. This is typically asked if you're working on a side project or something that you are interested in, that or like want to get artistic or creative satisfaction out of, and you run out of motivation. Now, there's two sort of angles that I think about. There's the intrinsic motivation and the extrinsic motivation. Intrinsically, you can keep your end goal in mind and just think about that, right? Like, hobby devs are usually making games to be creative and to inspire themselves. It's effectively the most complex form of an art project. And I think I witness a lot of people losing interest in their projects because when people start building a prototype to fulfill that and to fulfill this artistic drive, I think that in reality, they usually have built the thing that they wanted to build. They create a prototype and it's really cool and it's a lot of fun. And then they feel like they have to complete this video game. Sometimes that's just not the case, right? But if it is, then I encourage people to look at the thing that they've built and think about it and take a step back and experiment with the systems that they have. And more often than not, you'll find that if you have a really cool idea, you'll get excited about it the moment that you mess around with it. And that kind of goes into the extrinsic factor too, of like, oh, you're building a fun thing. You can engage with it. Other people can engage with it, right? If you like the thing you're making, there is at least one other person who likes that thing. And sharing it with people, there is no greater excitement to me than sharing a video game with someone and they just can't stop playing it, or sharing a board game and they just can't stop playing it. Yeah. And there's even more of that feeling when it's the thing that you've made.
Well,
right?
and I love how that works right into everything you just said. You brought it all the way down to the intrinsic in the extrinsic motivations, right? And what you were just talking about there goes right back to what you said before, is about that motivation and output. Now, the quick example you use is just something we can all identify with, but you made it very clear right after that, motivation and output isn't always like I'm making a game and I get money possibly from release, right? There's the aspects of fulfillment and everything else, which you clearly described. And man, what better way to summarize all this too from what you initially led with is just, find that passion, but then kind of review that process and how you explore that passion and stuff. Because I know this is where, like, it's not necessarily a trap, but it's an area we always get caught in, especially when we're watching other people out there that are saying, hey, you should really make a horror game because it could be successful. And people are like, I don't want to do that. But there's that side of things where, like, okay, that's not for me. But there's the other side too of like, okay, let's toy with this idea. I don't like horror games, but what if I apply this in a different new way that I could get on board with it? Maybe it's a cozy horror game. I don't know, but maybe it's accessible and something that I could actually care about and maybe get really excited about. And then it could like fuel something that, I mean, it's really just what you said there when you're evaluating processes and stuff is really about maybe when you evaluate that process and how you're making those decisions and what you want to do is really about maybe changing the perspective, changing the way you frame things and shifting your mindset a little bit into something new and different that, who knows, it could be like, it's something at the very least super exciting.
Oh yeah. And I mean, yeah, that's true. And if your goal is to make a commercial game, then motivation there is no better way to motivate yourself to make a commercial game than to make it your full-time job. right? To make a schedule and to make a community and to set deadlines and to have people playing your game and engaging with it and finding problems and asking you for things and the desire to sort of keep up with it. And there is no better way to motivate if you're working on something that you don't really want to work on, but everyone around you is like, I love this thing. I love your game. I want to play. And this hasn't really happened to me like extensively. It happened to me with Godwalker with 3 people, and those 3 people became a speedrunner of my game. One person was just really, really good and has to this day the record for like the longest roguelike run, and the third person just kind of like kept on coming back to it and kept on liking it. And that was enough for me to be like, oh, this is awesome, you guys are the best, I'm gonna make all these levels for you. And that was cool, that was a lot of fun. And I think that experience is not, it's not like it's something I'm chasing, but it is something that I do remember as something that really, it brought something nice out in the way that I make stuff, you know, and like the way that I'm motivated to make things.
And I think that's important too, because sometimes we all look at the greater, bigger picture of everything in terms of what we want. And a lot of times we don't necessarily define it, but we have an idea of what that may be, right? And we see this big idea, and like, I hate to really say this, I'm going to sound horrible, but as like, you know, Biggie Smalls once said, more money, more problems. And that can be very true too. But at the smaller scale though, what you described, I've been part of a project like that too. And to this day, the people who came in on this initial project, I think it was now, it's like 6 years, almost a full 6 years. And those same people are still there. I will go into the community like, I'm not that active there, but when I go there, they're still there and they're still part of it. And to see that, and I know it means so much for the developer, and it means a lot to me too. It's like, it's amazing to have that feeling. And I think those smaller types of moments that you just described are just as important. And sometimes when we're moving forward, we put them in our back pocket and move forward with them. And that in itself is a form of motivation, passion that we don't usually recognize. But man, it can make all the difference, because I could hear it in your voice the way you're saying it and stuff. And it's such a big driver to everything that we do. So, all right, we got to, there's so much, like, this might be 2 episodes. I don't know. Because there's so much we're talking about here that's so valuable. You know, back to what you're talking about, like kind of the process and everything else. And how we make our decisions and what we're creating and everything else. I want to get into this idea of prototyping, right? Especially smarter prototyping. What does, let's say, this idea, this concept of smarter prototyping, right? What does it actually look like in practice for, let's say, I don't know, solo developers or even a small team, or maybe isn't it even applicable to larger teams?
So I think the first distinction I'd like to quickly make is that there is no such thing as, I feel like there's not really such thing as a smarter prototype, because that implies that there is a dumber prototype, and I don't really think that that's the case. I think ultimately the best game designers that I know are people who can think about a game in their head, and they can play it through in their head and think about how people will interact with it. And I feel like I'd like to say that I'm fairly good at that. I think I'm much worse at that when it comes to like how people interact with the menus in a video game, I think. But like the actual play, I feel like I'm okay. The best people that I know that I look up to and hope to one day be as good as are Charles Pratt, who was a thesis advisor of mine at NYU, and Bennett Foddy, who I've met a couple times. He's a super cool guy, and you probably know him from the games that he's made. Both of those people, every time I talk to them, the way that they think about how people engage with experiences, I think that is ultimately what you should be doing with prototypes, right? Because not everybody is going to have a whole life spent of experience making games and watching people play them. So when you're making a prototype, the smart thing to do is to make something as quickly and easily as possible. You should just sit down and make a thing and see how people interact with it, right? That's the idea to me, is that if you are really good, you can do it in your head and think about like, okay, well, this is how this should interact with the player, and this is what information we should present. But that's hard. That takes a long time to develop that muscle. So the reason we prototype, at least in my eyes, is because we have an idea and we want to test it and we don't know how people will react. And oftentimes when you make a prototype, it is not necessarily what you think people will do with it. They will do new things. And so sit down with like a pencil and paper. And even if you're building a digital game, make a version of that game that is completely physical, right? Build something that you can sit down with your friend and just say, okay, well, this is the idea, this is the game, try it. And here are the rules. And maybe you're the computer. Maybe it's a strategy game and they move a character on a grid and you're playing all the enemies and you move the enemies around as if they would in the game and you follow the same logic. And we had this on Unwound because we had this idea for a mini game in the game where when you talk to someone, a grid comes up and you move left, right, up, or down to kind of change the mood of the other person. And you're moving on this tile board, this grid, and you're navigating a conversation. And once they solidify how they feel about you, right? If they like you or dislike you, if they trust you or mistrust you, then the conversation ends and the game world changes as a result. And we felt like this was a really interesting idea, and we didn't really have any references for it in games. So we just sat down at a whiteboard and drew the grid and just put a magnet on the whiteboard and played the game together. And then the next phase we did was we used a stuffed animal plushie and a bunch of cardboard and made a grid and just tested it. And that works. And I think that the takeaway from that, if I had to give one point for this question, is just you need to develop strong lines of communication with your team when you're a small team. You need to do that because as your game gets larger, you're not just prototyping small ideas, you're prototyping things that have a drastic effect on the broad scope of it. And so you really need to communicate how quickly things will take or how long things will take. So if you want to make a huge system in your FPS game for NPCs that interact with you, right? Then maybe there's one component of the NPCs that just, as the programmer, it's really easy to make them run, jump, are animated, climb stuff. That's all fine. But then somebody on your team is like, I want them to pick up glasses of water, and I want the water to be drinkable, and I want the cup of water to have water in it. And so as the programmer, it's your job to say, that's going to make this prototype take 2 weeks. Like in the time that I can make the cup of water with water in it, the rest of it is going to be done. Can we just do the rest of it and maybe fake the cup of water? And usually people are like, yeah, that's fine. Like, so yeah. There's those two components of like building something very quickly and easily, and then also just making sure that that thing can actually be built quickly and easily.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's like we get so caught in the vision of things where it's sometimes we got to bring ourselves down and ground ourselves better in terms of, okay, what is really the intent and purpose of this? And it sounds like a good methodology is make it fast, make it fun. If I was really to distill things quite a bit. I'm curious too, because you laid out an interesting process and everything when it comes to prototyping. At what point would you say that it stops being about, testing things out and experimenting and starts becoming a clear decision-making tool or just something we move forward with?
So this is something that I struggled a lot with, especially in grad school, because I think that I had such a long process of prototyping that in many ways I lost sight of what I was making. And this can pretty definitively be identified when you know what your North Star is and you know what it is you're making. So if your North Star is a game where you're always going fast and it's a racing game, and you make a prototype for a feature or an idea that inadvertently slows you down, then you're going to want to experiment some more, right? And you're going to want to find new things to do there. Really, I think there's very rarely a point in the production cycle where you're making a prototype from the opposite angle, right? When outside of the initial prototyping phase, when you're making new features, you're not going to be making a racing game about where your North Star has been going fast and say the game is halfway done, but we're not going fast. So here's a prototype where you go fast. And sometimes maybe you are. Sometimes maybe you have to take a reflection, and sometimes you have to do that. But most of the time you're not, right? Most of the time the initial prototyping phase is where you sort of are feeling it out and kind of waiting to see when like what your North Star might be. You might have an idea for a racing game, but you don't know what the feeling is. You don't know what the vibe is. But then you make a prototype where you're going really fast and you're like, oh no, that's it. That's the thing I want to make. It might not be that exact game, but it's like, that's my North Star. That's the thing I want to do. I want to make a game about going really fast. And so then it's no longer about experimentation. And now it's, okay, do the cars have wheels or do they have hovering wheels? Can I make a prototype where they float on walls? And then from there, you will start to think, okay, now this is a decision I'm making and this is no longer experimentation. So once you define that North Star, you essentially begin the process of prototyping and building the game concentrically. And so in short, it stops being experimentation when I've used this analogy before, but it stops being experimentation when you stop throwing stuff at the wall just to see if it sticks to the wall. And it starts being a decision-making tool when the wall is magnetic and you're purposefully throwing little prototype magnets at the wall to see if the arrangement looks good or if they fit in or if it's the way you want them to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I like that analogy. It's like, okay, what's sticking? And then you're like, okay, maybe there's 3 things that are sticking. And then you're like, okay, but then somehow you're just gravitating towards that one. And those are sticking a lot more. And then when you're looking at things, you're like, oh, those spots, there's 2 that are small and there's 1 that's freaking huge. I think that's a sign.
Yeah, and I don't want to play favorites because my fridge magnets are like right there. But I do feel like there are just fridge magnets that I feel like are so much more interesting to me than some others, right? Like sometimes I look at my fridge and I have a bunch of magnets and some of them are like, yeah, I mean, I got that at a store, but some of them are, oh, my family gave me that, or I got that on a trip, or that's from 2 of my best friends and they're, and so it's, and then, then it's just like, this is literally just a magnet I bought at a gas station, right? Because I needed a magnet for my fridge. And and sometimes it's like, okay, well, maybe I should make the game about the gas station, but you might not have that motivation, which is kind of loops back into what we said before, that like there's less meaning there. So I took that analogy so much further that I was going to
That was amazing. I don't know. I'm thinking about my own refrigerator now.
Your own
and the limited space
maybe
I
everybody
have
should. Should we have the audience like type about their fridge magnets?
Oh my
in the
goodness.
Comments and
Man, I only post on LinkedIn. That'll make it interesting LinkedIn post. But these days, it's more social than ever. So, hey, when this goes live and you want to comment on it, please share your fridge magnet stories or any magnet stories that you have. And it's okay if you want to play favorites or not. I'll leave that to you. Speaking of magnets, though, as you called out too, it's like, hey, I'm using this as tools. And as it relates to tools, I want to kind of discuss what maybe tools that are helpful when we're prototyping and everything. And I know this is an area that of your expertise too, but where can tools or even other types of systems, would you say, have the biggest impact on making, let's say, prototype faster or more effective, like, to the points that you were sharing earlier?
I think it's everywhere is my broad answer. I think that in my experience, the more tools that I have, the better. I've never been in a situation in which a tool gets in the way of progress. And there is a situation, but I know that we're going to cover that a little bit. But I think that on all of my projects, especially ones where I am working with others, but as well as ones where I'm working alone, making a tool that allows you to build your game is so valuable. And I think that in my eyes, game development and game development, tool development are synonymous. I don't think that, to me, there's not a difference, right? You could argue, sure, you can make a series of systems that you engage with, right? But to me, building tools for non-technical members, right? I'm talking the UI designer, right, who doesn't really open Unity, works mostly in Figma, or I'm talking the narrative designer who works extensively in Google Drive or in another text editor, or even someone like a creative director who just has great ideas for levels but doesn't know how to implement them. If you make tools for them, and you just say, go crazy, make something really wild, they'll do stuff that you are surprised about. You will be shocked at how much they will get done. I have a couple of examples. Oh my gosh, I have so many. What's a good one? I have in one of the educational games I was working on, I worked on building a tool. Most of the work was done by one of my coworkers, Cameron Gonzalez, who I'd like to give a major shout out for building this tool because it's a great example. But he and I helped him sort of lay out the structure and the architecture and the game systems, but he integrated Ink, it's sort of like Twine. It's a software that allows you to write branching stories.
Yes, I'm familiar with it. Yep.
Okay. And so we integrated that with Unity. And as a result, we were able to just, like, people who had no technical expertise at all were like, oh, let's make a character move in. Let's make the environment change. Let's make the lighting change. Let's have people move around the environment. Let's play an animation. And they were doing this with text in an editor. But more than that, they could write dialogue, a lot of dialogue. And that was really cool. And the same can be said now. I'm working on a different project. I built an audio system. And this was like this project. Actually, this was a while ago. This was about a year and a half ago. I built this audio system where I ended up using these drag and drop elements where the audio designer didn't actually have to write any code. All they had to do was say, okay, when this thing happens in the game, play the sound. And they were able to apply all these effects directly in Unity. And that's very similar to what Wise or Fmod can do, right? You can customize your sounds, but the audio designer just went crazy and put sounds in the whole game in like an afternoon. And I was like, what is happening? Right. And so it's that sort of thing, right? Where you ultimately want to create like a Halo Forge editor, right? In your game, right? If you're building a ton of levels, making a Halo Forge level editor makes it so much faster and easier. And I did that with Godwalker, and I made like a bunch of levels. And as a result of doing that, like I knew I would need a lot of enemies placed around the environment, and I knew exactly how I wanted them to spawn in. So I wrote a combat director, and the combat director just uses logic to spawn people in at different locations and how they move and their activity and their behavior and all that stuff. So if you're making levels, build a level editor. If you want to make a bunch of power-ups in your game, try and think about like a power-up system so that you can very quickly and easily make a bunch of different things. If you're making like vehicles, make a thing that's like a vehicle creation tool, and you can control how quickly they turn and the suspension and the speed. And when you start doing this, you realize that every single thing in your game is actually just waiting for you to reap the benefits of making it into a tool. And so that's my answer to the question, is that tools have the biggest impact everywhere all of the time because they're constant. They're a constant for me. They're a universal constant. There's no situation where I've looked at a thing and been like, maybe I shouldn't make that a tool. But that's also the next question, right? It's like,
yes, but before we get there too, I want to ask your thoughts on this because I think earlier you led in with the idea and concept of how tools can be beneficial for all members of the team, right? And where I want to kind of explore that a little bit too is because I think at face value, a lot of us will think of examples of tools, like some of the ones you shared and stuff being like, okay, it's maybe a form of software or interface or something that we're engaged with to serve whatever its purpose is. But then there's also, I think, maybe further upstream, especially when it comes into the like even concept development of other types of tools that aren't necessarily like product or related to an interface or something, but more of like a framework or even potentially like a philosophy or something along those lines. Because I think, and I want your take on those too, because I think it's important that when we consider tools, it could be something as simple as a rubric to follow when writing a paper or something, or using it to grade one in that case. But still, those types of tools and resources are also as helpful to kind of put restraints in or guardrails and things like that. And I wanted your quick thoughts on that too, because sometimes we can get a little crazy making tools too, and that obviously leads into the other question in a moment. But I wanted your quick takes on other types of tools like that.
There's so many, and actually, this is the second or third time in sort of a professional discussion where someone's asked me about non-technical tools, actually, which is so funny, which makes me think maybe I should just lead with that. Right? Like, but I think that when I'm working with any of my collaborators, the thing that we need to do is find the way that we work best together. And in the process of finding that, we can identify and reflect on all of the small pieces and snags that we found. And it's important to remember that the objective of you're not necessarily like upset with anyone, like you're professionally disagreeing on something. The objective there is like, sometimes I will literally clarify. I will say, do you want me to fight you on things? Do you want me to debate things that I believe in? Do you want me to like, and sometimes people are like, yeah, of course I want that. And other times people are like, no, I kind of just want to finish this project and be done with it and just do the things that I feel like are right. And if that's the case, I'll usually be like, okay, I mean, I guess, sure. Like, I guess I won't push back, but it'll, it takes every fiber of my being. But, on some projects, I will, every time I have even a slight inkling of like, I don't really like how we're thinking about this, I will bring it up and I'll raise it. And developing, like you said, like sort of a format or a predictable form of collaboration where if you raise something to the team, the format in which they respond can almost be like a bug report in many ways where, or even just, I hate to use the word like direct confrontation, but it can be sort of like a direct discussion of like, this is what I like, this is what I dislike. And then you can work together as a team to move forward. And I feel like building those environments and those tool sets, right, and creating a space that's safe for that kind of discussion. And I think I was in like, to make this delineation clear, when I was in grad school, there was a class, it was production practicums taught by a good friend and collaborator of mine, Scott Price. And in the class, you sort of are producing your own game, right? And it's a practicum. So you're literally sitting there producing your game. You're doing all of the steps. You're being an executive producer or like a direct producer. And it's quite a bit of work, but it's worth it. And you learn how to manage your project, essentially. And a part of the course was you could pitch ideas and you could pitch your game. And a student pitched a game, and one of the other people in the class was like really harsh on them. And the game was something like, oh, we're going to make an MMO and we're going to need $7 or $8 million in funding, and we're going to publishers now, and we're really going to do this pitch, and we're investing all our time into it. And somebody else in the class who was very experienced in the games industry was like, you're not going to get anything and no one will be interested, and here's why. And I spoke to them after. I was like, hey, you were like really harsh on them. I feel like this should be like a pretty calm and safe space, right? I feel like you shouldn't be going after them like that. And then they turned to me and they're like, well, this is the safe space, right? This is the space where we can critique one another. This is the space where we can debate things. And this is like, I don't think that they're bad people or anything. And I'm not trying to be mean to them, but if there is any space in which they should hear that they're not going to receive $8 million for their MMO that looks and acts and is just World of Warcraft, it's probably this space.
Otherwise,
it's probably
do it and then find out the same answer with time and resources spent.
Right. And I think that creating that environment and building that space, it was in that moment that I was like, okay, actually that does make sense, that we should have a space where we enter into this magic circle. And in this space, we can all talk about stuff together and be critical of one another and be very strong-willed. And that's expected. And I think that as a tool is something that establishing those boundaries and establishing that precedent when you begin working on a project is incredibly important, because and this happens a lot in game jams, and I've seen it happen where people expect that and some people don't. And very quickly, the social dynamic gets thrown way out of whack.
Yeah, and good point.
So establishing, that's the biggest non-technical tool in my toolbox.
Yeah, I'd say.
Right.
And for those of who are questioning, like, oh, what does this kind of look like? I mean, obviously, you're going to have to do your own research and stuff to find out what aligns well and what methods. I think what Josh defined just now is probably going to be the most straightforward approach. But as you're saying that too, and as I'm thinking about those types of approaches, there's other ways to go about the similar concept of what you just defined, where it could be like more of a coaching or guiding method where you know exactly where this is going, and if you know that person is not very straightforward, even if you set those expectations and precedents of being like that it can invoke some forms of confrontation, you know that's not them. It could be more of a like prompts where you're asking questions that are somewhat, and you tailor them a certain way so they come to the same conclusion and form the same logic that you already know, and therefore ultimately they through their own process they're actually realizing what you've been thinking or saying all along, and they're like, oh, I get it now, that makes sense. And this is a bit more trickier and probably skilled required to do.
It sounds like
there's other ways to look at it. but I mean, I'm going like a few steps and depths lower, but what I really want to say here is there's lots of different ways to approach this that can work for you and your team, and it all comes down to what is the best method of communication with you guys.
Yeah, I think there's thousands of...
Yeah, exactly.
I would read... One of the books that inspired me a lot to explore this was Playful Production Process by Richard Lemarchand, he was a games professor in California, and he's a super smart guy. He was the director of the first 3 Uncharted games, and the book basically goes in depth about all of these ideas of like, how do you as an individual cooperate with a team? I believe there's an entire chapter in that book, and then there's also one in Tracy Fullerton's Game Design Workshop where it's like communication as a game design skill, and there are just chapters and chapters, and it's important. And I think that ultimately all to me at least, all non-technical or non-design related tools are forms of communication. So I totally agree. Yeah.
I know we're coming on time here, but there's a couple of things I want to address too from what we were talking about before. You know, one is you did share lots of examples and ideas and stuff on tools, right? How do we also determine that they're actually supporting the work and iteration process and stuff versus becoming a distraction in a rabbit hole?
So I know that I've given a lot of really long and specific and in-depth answers, but this one is just so hilariously short. If I'm building something more than once in a video game, I make a tool for it. And if it only happens one time in the video game, I don't make a tool for it. I just make it once. That's really it. I don't really have any more than that.
That's but it makes sense, right? Because it's like, if you're trying to build, you're right. If you're spending the time and energy to build something that you're only going to do once, but at least the second time you're doing it too, you already have the process at least down in your head. So to some degree, right? So then if you, depending on how much you plan things out with your studio or in other future projects, like, hey, I see myself making a lot of different types of games that are in this genre, for example. There you go. You have other signals that can imply that can help with that decision.
Like most games have one kind of player controller, right?
Yep.
Or one kind of camera controller. There is no need to make a tool to make lots of different player controllers if that's the case, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's my answer.
There you go.
It's very short.
And the last one here to wrap things up is, for developers out there that are looking to prototype faster without losing focus, what would you say are good workflows or habits that that's worth putting the time into?
Yeah. So focus is a thing that I personally have struggled with, or at least did struggle with a lot, especially starting undergrad and then starting grad school, kind of in that period of time out in the world on your own, right? I have type 3 ADHD, and so I had to find lots of methods, right? I'm currently constantly finding new ways to keep myself in the game and keep myself focused. I think that the things that helped me the most are primarily surrounding myself with the thing that I'm doing. I have books on game design that I read. I have articles that I look at. I have communities I'm part of, but then also literally surrounding yourself. I have a 3-monitor setup, right? I have a really nice chair, and I sit in this zone, and I am surrounded by my code and Unity and any research that I have, and I'm thinking about it. And so if I ever do get distracted, I usually just get distracted by a thing that's on my screen, which diverts me back into what I'm doing. And I know that's a very specific answer, but ultimately, I guess the takeaway is like, find the things that are taking long for you, right? Find the things that are distracting you. Find the things that are making this process take longer and work on shortening them. Put in time and effort and invest in them. Invest in your space, invest in your tools, invest in how you're working. I find that if I'm working on a laptop, sometimes it works great. If it's a calm environment, then I'm usually fine, like a library or my home or even a coffee shop. But if it's busy in the background, right? If I don't have headphones, it's a lot more difficult. And ultimately, I think that you have that real world component, but then you also have of like your environment, but you also have that digital component of your environment. And so building a digital environment too that is conducive to your success is important. And that can be as simple as making sure Unity is installed, making sure that your code editor works, right? And
or your notifications
like,
are
I
off.
don't, right. I actually don't have any notifications at all. I don't. I turned off I don't even have, I think I only have Discord and like texting on my phone. And those don't even do, they don't even have sound. Like they come up and like I see those little, but I don't have any, I mean, I remember I was filling out the form for this podcast and it was like, put your social media here, and I was like, I don't really have that. Like, I'm really sorry, but like I don't have any desktop notifications. I don't even get the little number on my Discord icon on my taskbar to tell me how many like I don't. If I want to, like, if I have Discord open, I'll respond to a message, right? And so I think that that's one aspect of the digital environment. But then the next one is to actually, you can build yourself tools to make stuff, right? Like I programmed a small Git client because I was constantly making small commits and I didn't want to have to do all the steps for all of them. So I literally wrote this small little baby thing that lets me type in a message and click one button and it just commits and pushes to my repo. And that's it. And that's like a little tool. It's an example of a thing you can make that just helps you, right?
Yeah.
You can, there's other examples too of like in the game, if you are building a long linear game, make a thing that lets you edit the save file. Make a thing that lets you teleport to different levels. Don't build your game to be linear and then not have a way to interrupt that linear element of it, because otherwise you'll just be sitting there playing through the game over and over. So there's those two elements, kind of the element of the real world, your real environment, where you should be. I mean, ironically, I actually like to be a little bit uncomfortable in the chair that I'm in, because then I can't really get relaxed. I have to stay upright. I have to stay focused, which works a lot better than being slightly uncomfortable. It's probably also better for my back. But and then there's that digital environment where you should be able to do everything without any friction. You should be able to test your game. You should be able to build it.
I absolutely love those points and everything you shared, and a lot of what you shared too, if those of you are curious. And actually, we just last guest I had, we shared this book as well. But what you defined, whether you're aware of it or not, is very well documented in James Clear's book, Atomic Habits.
Oh my gosh, I have to read it.
Yes.
Everybody keeps telling me that I should read it. It looks really great. It looks really great.
I would say out of all the habit books out there, that's probably going to be one of the best. But at any rate,
the funny thing is, I'm like every single time someone tells me to read it, it's because I'm doing a lot of the things that are in the book.
Yes.
I use Obsidian and I make tiny notes, like they call somebody told me, oh, you're making atomic notes, and I was like, the hubba dubba, like what am I doing? And so I just think I got to read it because I think I would vibe really well with it.
I think you'd vibe, and outside of recognizing what you're already doing, it may also just maybe reemphasize some other strategies or tactics and points. But for the most part, you'd be, if anything, sharpening the tool that you have. That is a pretty good tool already.
That's a great way to put that. I like the way that you just slipped that in there. That's like
it worked. It was appropriate. But yeah, and for those listening, seriously, if it, like we were talking about prototyping and stuff, but honestly, with anything, worth checking out that book. It's maybe coincidence it came up twice last 2 episodes, but all worth it. Josh, we talked a lot of different things and covered a lot. What are some 3 takeaways that listeners can get from our conversation?
Okay, so first of all, if you should find something that excites you, and you should just keep exploring that excitement, right? You should really prototype until you find it, and then you should find new ways to engage with it. I think that every single person grows up differently and has different hobbies and has different interests. Like if you love, I have a collaborator who loves archaeology and loves history, and he's making this. I actually just got to see it for the first time the other day. He's making this really cool game about it, and he just loves it. And I think that everyone who I've spoken to who's seen this or heard about this is like, I love this game so much because he's so into it. He's showing me he's talking about it, and the way that he presents it is just really cool. And I've seen other people too. Like I have a friend who's working on a beautiful game with an incredible art style that looks like a Studio Ghibli movie. And he's an accomplished animator and loves that style. And he spent years prototyping and building to get this game that feels like you're watching a film. And it's beautiful. And I think that these are just examples of people who love, everybody loves a thing, right? Everybody loves a thing. And my first of the 3 tips is find that thing, prototype it, explore it, and just find new ways to engage with it. Second thing is, I would say, as you know, this might be obvious, but build tools to help you do that. And that can be either for that one project, or I, for example, have a project agnostic toolkit, and I use it to build new game ideas. I have a player controller that's mine, and it's ready to go. And I have an interaction controller, like an interaction system that I can use to make puzzles, and that's ready to go. And at this point, I have built whole games in a matter of days. And like, for example, all of Chromatic Isle, it's like a musical puzzle game. I built all of that in a weekend, and then I just released it on Steam. And it was cool because it was the first time that I really felt like the tools that I had been building up allowed me to make something engaging and fun and interesting, and weren't just a collection of different technical pieces. And then finally, I would say, and this is the most important one, but don't compare your process to others too harshly. I think that I see a lot of prototypes, and the first thing that I think is just, oh wow, I wish I made that. I wish I made something like that. Oh, that's so cool. And it's really easy to think like, gosh, why didn't I think of that? That's like the coolest thing I've ever seen, or that's the funniest thing I've ever seen. And I have that all the time. And at first I felt really self-conscious. I was like, well, is this reflective of me as a games designer, right? Am I just missing the mark? Am I doing something that doesn't make sense? But I've come to learn that those are, I see you're shaking your head as well. But I've come to learn that those are golden moments, right? Those are like the most golden moments where you can really dig in and say, oh man, I love this so much. I love this so much. And I want to take this component of this thing that I love so much, and I want to take that feeling and put it in my games, and I want to see how I can use it going forward. And like, I think it was, sorry, let me look this up. There was a game. Yes, it was Endoparasitic is the name of the game. And it was one of the first games that I had ever seen made in Godot that was really not just impressive, but I was like, oh, you made this in Godot? And it's a 2D game about a guy on a spaceship, and he's got one arm, and that's it. And you're pulling along the ground with the one arm, and it's not very graphic. It's kind of like cartoony almost. And the idea is that you have to get off this, you like navigate and explore and get off this spaceship with just one arm. And you have to, and it's really cool. And it's such a simple and straightforward idea. And the animation is so interactive, and the inverse kinematics on the 2D character are just really cool. And like, I know that the audience can't see the video, but I'm like raising and lowering my right arm as like my elbow moving. And it's just cool. And I feel like when I see that, I'm like, okay, I love the idea of like moving your arm right in a video game. And that's what I mean, is like you find something that's just so freaking cool, and you think about how you can incorporate it into your work, right? And you think about what you like about it, and don't do it harshly, but do it with interest and do it with fun.
Yeah, no, I've said this a lot on the show before, like compare and despair, but what you're calling out is like, okay, but take that next step, like really look at it in a way that, what can you learn from that? How can you apply it in your own way and things like that, as opposed to looking at like, why didn't I do that? Because there's any number of reasons that could have happened, but it says nothing about you as a creator or anything else. So just take that for that what you call that golden moment for what it's worth. And who knows, it could just create your own other moment where in the end, but again, don't compare and despair. Use it as an opportunity.
Yeah, and then like I don't want to speak for anyone specifically, but I think that if you see something that you really really love and you think that thing that someone has made, these aren't, I think that we have this weird, I think that games have this weird perception as things that are not made by people, and I think that originates from like the New York Times crossword puzzle being a thing that just arrives on your doorstep sometimes, or like used to at least. And so I think that, it's important to remember that people make these things, and a lot of the time these creators of these small, especially small indie games, if you message them on, or like talk to them on Blue Sky or on Reddit or wherever, one time I emailed a guy, and they're usually really enthusiastic to be like, I'm so glad my game had a great effect on you. And if you have questions for them, sometimes they'll answer. If they don't want to, then that's fine. But so I've had people email me, I've had people text me or chat with me at a conference, and I'm always so happy that something that I've made had such a positive impact on them. Taking it even a step further, I would say, like, reach out. Don't be overbearing or anything, but like there's no harm in sending an email or responding to a tweet and saying that you really like a thing that somebody's made and asking them a question. And if you'll be surprised at how much you can learn from it.
Yeah, I love that, like, bonus, tip right there. That's huge, because you're absolutely right. Just that one extra effort in saying, hey, I really appreciate this, and maybe just like follow up with a question, like something you notice and everything, that could just start so many positive things from that moment on. Whether it's a good working relationship, just a relationship of some type, or even just a little mini learning lesson. Like, so you have nothing to lose in those moments. So love that final one. Josh, unfortunately, we're here. We're at time. It's been so good. There's been so many things, and really appreciate the level of depth that you've provided with us today too, because I know we could even dive in more. But that said, hey, if people want to connect with you, find out more about your projects, the work you do, whatever else, please drop us some links or where people can do that.
Yeah, of course. You can find my website, joshhirshfield.com. I assume it'll be in like a description area, like an episode links area. Okay. So then, yeah, feel free to access it there. My website. I've also got a blog that, to be honest, I would like to be more active on, but I also have a few things on there. My blog will always be free. It will always remain free. I talk extensively about the systems that I create in games and explain the technical components of them and how you can create them too, and the challenges that I've faced and the things that you can just immediately take away and run with. There's stuff on there about camera controllers, interaction systems, and all of it will remain free forever. I am just a very strong believer in public ed. And if you want to find my talks, my website also has a section for talks, so you can see all the talks there. And if you go to my YouTube channel, I think it's like just my name, but you can find it through the website. If you have trouble finding the talks on the website, because there are some that are like Google Slides embeds, and there's some that are videos, there is just a YouTube playlist. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me on Blue Sky, though I don't really use social media too much. But if you send me a message, I am happy to chat, happy to say hello. Always happy to make new connections. And it's just, I'm laughing because I'm smiling because I am on several projects that are under NDA, and I just made it clear. I'm like, hey, I'm going on this podcast. Do you want me to say anything? And they were like, no, you can't talk about anything that you're making. But I will say that, I will say this, I do have clauses in my contracts with all the studios that I work with, including Wirescribe, including my own studio, just to keep everything above board. And on the projects that I'm working on now, I have a clause that says that I can use any of the code or any of the features that I make in the game for educational purposes. And so as a result of that, if you're interested in learning about how game systems are made and stuff that you'd like me to, if there's anything specific that you'd like me to go in depth on, or just things that I've made that you would like to see more of, I have a blog. I will be posting there about these really cool in-depth systems that I can't talk about soon, very soon. And I just love to share it with people, and yeah, that's I just love to share it with people. So
I love
if
it.
that's interesting
So,
to anyone, tag
folks,
in. You know,
go check it out, joshhirshfield.com. Again, this and the other links Josh mentioned will be in the show notes. And yeah, connect, because I think you got a good taste in terms of what Josh has to offer. There's so much there. Really, Josh, can't thank you enough for being here. So much stuff, value, everything packed into this episode. Really, it means a lot to me, but also hope to our listeners as well. So can't thank you enough, man.
it was fantastic to be here. It was lovely to speak with you, Andrew. I had a great time. I had a really good time.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.